In the 17th century, as European nations began to establish colonies in the New World, slavery became an inseparable part of life in the American colonies, particularly in the South. Slavery was not just a social institution, but also a crucial economic pillar. However, it was far from being a static institution. It evolved over time and became one of the most contentious issues in history, ultimately leading to one of the greatest conflicts, the Civil War. The Southern economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, especially crops like cotton and tobacco, which required cheap and abundant labor. This dependence on slavery created a stark economic divide between the North and the South. While the North industrialized and modernized, the South remained agrarian, clinging to a plantation system that relied on enslaved labor to maintain its economic stability. This growing divide between the two regions intensified over time, particularly over the issue of slavery. By the early 19th century, tensions between slave states and free states began to escalate. Various compromises and agreements were attempted to ease these tensions. One of the most notable was the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state while prohibiting slavery in territories north of a designated line. Later, the Compromise of 1850 further attempted to balance the interests of both sides, admitting California as a free state while enacting stricter fugitive slave laws. Despite these efforts, the divide only deepened. The North increasingly embraced anti-slavery sentiments, with many opposing the forced return of escaped slaves and supporting the abolitionist movement. This shift in public opinion created a new political landscape, with the emergence of political parties heavily influenced by the slavery debate. In 1854, the Republican Party was formed, largely by those who sought to halt the expansion of slavery into newly opened Western territories. This stance directly opposed the pro-slavery policies of leaders like President Franklin Pierce and James Buchanan. The election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, in 1860 was the final straw for many Southern leaders. Fearing that slavery would soon be abolished, they viewed Lincoln's victory as a threat to their way of life. For the South, slavery was not just an economic necessity, but also a cultural and political institution that they believed must be preserved. In response to Lincoln's election, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860. Over the following months, other Southern states followed, forming the Confederate States of America, a new nation dedicated to preserving slavery and their way of life. This secession marked the beginning of what would become the American Civil War, a conflict that would determine whether the United States could remain united or whether the profound differences between the North and the South would tear it apart. While slavery was the central issue that ignited the conflict, the war was about more than just the institution of slavery. It was a clash between two vastly different economic systems, two distinct ways of life, and two opposing views on states' rights versus federal authority. The Civil War was a defining moment in American history, testing the nation's ability to reconcile its differences and remain united. It was not merely a struggle over slavery, but a profound battle over the future direction of the country, pitting industrialization and modernization against agrarian traditions and entrenched social hierarchies. Ultimately, the war would reshape the nation, but not without immense cost and lasting consequences.